What is up, ladies and gentlemen? This is Union Arena Battle Guren and Gawain versus Zenitsu and Inosuke. Code Geass versus Demon Slayer. Which anime do you think is the best? Let me know down in the comments. Both players played Rochambeau. Player on the left will be going first. Both players drawing cards and setting life down. Player 1 goes first by tapping an action point and playing a Kalen into the energy line. Pass and turn to player 2. Player 2 draws a card and taps both of their action points, playing 0 cost Inosuke and 0 cost Sumiko onto the field. Pass and turn to player 1. Player 1 draws a card, pulling another action point into play. Player 1 taps an action point to play Kalen onto the back line. Player 1 now has 2 energy. Player 1 taps another action point to play Lelouch onto the back line. Pass and turn to player 2. Player 2 draws a card starting their turn, taps an action point and plays Nezuko onto the back line. Taps another action point to play Tanjiro onto the front line. Pass and turn to player 1. Player 1 draws a card and pulls their last action point into the game. Player 1 taps an action point to play Kalen onto the field. That has an effect. When played, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, reveal up to 1 card with Guren in its card name among them and add it to your hand. Place the remaining cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. Player 1 draws the top 5 cards, pulling a Guren MK2 into hand. Player 1 taps an action point to play Lelouch onto the back line. Player 1 taps their last action point to play Guren MK2 Raiden Kalen from the back line, putting Guren onto the front line. And when played, if Lelouch is on the field, this character gains your opponent must block this character's attacks if able and gains impact. Player 1 switches to attack phase. Player 1 attacks with Guren. Player 2 has to block it and also takes damage. Player 1 doing the first damage of the game. Player 2's life had a trigger special. Choose one character your opponent's front line and sideline it. Player 2 chooses player 1's Guren and sidelines it. Player 1 ends turn. Player 2 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 2 taps an action point and plays Zenitsu onto the back line. Player 2 taps another action point to raid Zenitsu from the back line onto the front line. Zenitsu has an ability when raided. When played, if Inosuke is on the field, draw 2 cards, then place 1 card from your hand into your sideline. Also, Zenitsu gets double damage. With Tanjiro being on the field, player 2 Zenitsu gets double damage. Player 2 attacks player 1, but player 1 blocks the damage. Player 2 passes turn. Player 1 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 1 taps an action point and plays Lelouch onto the back line. And when played, choose up to 1 character in your opponent's front line. It loses 1000 BP until the end of the turn. Player 1 chooses player 2 Zenitsu on the front line. Player 1 taps an action point and plays Guren Raiden onto the front line. Guren has that raid when played ability, giving him impact, and the opponent must block if able. Player 1 taps an action point to play United States or Japan, allowing him to stand up 2 action points. Player 1 taps an action point, playing Kalen onto the field. When played, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, reveal up to 1 Guren in card name among them and add it to your hand. Place the remaining cards in the bottom of your deck in any order. Player 1 chooses this Guren. Player 1 switches to attack mode. Player 1 attacks with Guren on the front line, and because player 2 has to block if able, player 2 loses their Zenitsu and takes the damage. Player 1 passes turn to player 2. Player 2 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 2 taps an action point and plays Inosuke onto the back line. Player 2 taps another action point to play Tanjiro onto the front line. Player 2 then passes turn to player 1. Player 1 draws a card, untaps action points. Player 1 taps an action point to take an extra draw. Player 1 taps an action point and plays Guren MK2 onto the front line. When played, choose up to 1 character with 3000 or less BP on your opponent's front line and sideline it. This character gains impact. Player 1 chooses player 2's Tanjiro on the front line and sidelines it. Player 1 taps an action point and plays a 0 onto the back line, is treated as Lelouch. Player 1 switches to attack phase and attacks with Guren. Player 2 takes the damage. Player 2 has a trigger but does not have the required cards or energy to perform a raid. Player 1 attacks with their other Guren. Player 2 takes the damage and has no trigger. Player 1 passes turn. Player 2 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 2 taps an action point and plays Zenitsu onto the front line. When played, look at the top 7 cards of your deck, reveal up to 1 card with raid among them and add it to your hand. Place the remaining cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. If you added a card to your hand, place 1 card from your hand into the sideline. Player 2 chooses Inosuke raid card. Player 2 taps an action point and raises Zenitsu onto the front line. Player 2 taps another action point, Raiden Inosuke onto the front line. When played, if Zenitsu's on the field, choose up to 1 character on the field and switch it to active. If Tanjiro's on the field, it also gains impact. Player 2 switches to attack mode, attacks player 1. Player 1 takes the damage, no trigger on the first life. Player 2 attacks with Zenitsu, causing double damage. Player 2 takes the damage. The first trigger adds the card to player 1's hand. The second damage, no trigger, goes straight to the sideline. Player 2 passes turn. Player 1 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 1 taps 2 action points to play Lelouch. When played, your opponent places 1 card from their hand into the sideline. Player 1 taps an action point and plays Checkmate. Choose 1 character on your front line. It gains 2000 BP until the end of the turn. If Lelouch is on the field, the character also gains impact. Player 1 chooses Guren in the middle to gain plus 2000 and impact since Lelouch is on the field. Player 1 switches to attack phase. Player 1 attacks with Guren in the middle, a total of 6000 BP and impact. Player 2 takes the damage. Player 2's damage has a trigger. Choose 1 character in the field and switch to active. It gains 3000 BP until the end of the turn. Player 2 chooses Zenitsu. Player 1 passes turn. Player 2 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 2 taps an action point and plays Inosuke onto the back line. Player 1 taps an action point and plays Zenitsu onto the front line, allowing him to look at the top 7 cards and choose a raid. Player 2 chose Inosuke, adds the rest of the cards to the bottom of the deck. Player 2 attacks with Zenitsu. Player 1 takes the double damage. The first life has a trigger, a final. Unfortunate for player 1, goes to the sideline. The second damage allows player 1 has a trigger that allows player 1 to remove a card from player 2, and player 1 chooses player 2's Inosuke. Player 2 passes turn, player 1 draws a card and untaps action points. Player 1 taps 2 action points and plays Power of Absolute Obedience, allowing him to remove a character with 5,000 or less BP. If Lelouch is on the field, Lelouch is on the field. Player 1 chooses player 2's Zenitsu and removes it off the field. Power of Obedience allowed player 1 to untap an action point. Player 1 untaps an action point. Player 1 then plays. Player 1 taps an action point, playing Checkmate, giving Guren in the middle plus 2,000 BP and impact. Player 1 ends up moving to attack phase and attacking player 2. Player 2 ends up taking all damage. Player 1 winning the game. Code Geass versus Demon Slayer. Code Geass is the winner. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and have a good day.